Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar of the Gerhard Center webinar series, The Aftermath of COVID-19, the New Social Impact Ecosystem. Today, we are very honored to have with us Christopher Marquis, the Samuel C. Johnson Professor in Sustainable Global Enterprise at Cornell. His research focuses on how businesses are creating a more resilient and sustainable capitalism by focusing on the elusive triple bottom line of environmental, social, and financial performance. Prior to joining Cornell, he worked for 10 years at Harvard Business School, where he developed an award-winning course on social entrepreneurship. He is also the author of more than 50 Harvard business cases on sustainable business. His recent book, Better Business, How the B Corp Movement is Remaking Capitalism, which was published last September, is a gold medalist in the business ethics category in the Axiom Books Business Books Award 2021. And it was also longlisted for the 2020 Porchlight Business Book Award. He will provide a compelling look at the B Corp movement and why socially and environmentally responsible companies are vital for everybody's future. He will detail a new corporate ethos, one that argues that business can only truly thrive when they benefit everyone who's affected by their operation. This is informed by over a decade of research and animated by interviews with the B Corp movement founders and leading figures. Marquis tells the history of the B Corp and the origin of its certifying organization, the B Lab. Without much ado, Chris, floor is yours, sir.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Ali. Thank you all for coming. Let me share my screen here. Okay, can you all see that? Okay, I'm going to assume so. Let me know if not. Okay, so as Ali mentioned, thank you, Ali. I'm going to be talking today about my recent book, Better Business: How the B Corp Movement is Remaking Capitalism. It's a real honor to be here with you across oceans. I'm in New York City right now, and I know that there's people from around the world, particularly in Egypt and Cairo. So this idea of the book is really about how business can become much more stakeholder oriented. You've probably heard this term stakeholders. It means, in addition to shareholders, companies emphasize and pay significant attention to their employees, their consumers, their communities, and the environment. And the core argument of the book is that this B Corp movement provides a really sort of authentic and tractable way for companies to become more stakeholder oriented. I'm going to describe B Corps, and certainly if they become B Corps along the way, that's great. Although a lot of companies will, use some of the tools and processes outlined in the book and not become B Corps at all. So I wrote the book. The book came out about half a year ago in September. It was delayed because of COVID, and I had finished it actually before the pandemic. And really, I think it's even more sort of useful and more appropriate now after the pandemic as well. There's all this discussion around building back better. That sort of the pandemic has really identified a lot of systemic issues in our economic, societal systems, in that we need to, create an economy that is more resilient and takes care of broader sets of peoples instead of just sort of the rich, the billionaires, and the owners of companies. So this argument that I put forward about business needing to be more stakeholder oriented, is in contrast to what has been the dominant ideology over the past 50 or so years, what is known as shareholder primacy. It dates to this idea that shareholders' interests have a higher priority over other interests, other stakeholders. Dates about 50 years ago to 1970s, this very influential essay by Milton Friedman, actually a Nobel Prize winning economist, that he wrote in the New York Times Magazine that really said, the social responsibility, as you can see, of business is to increase profits. Really, shareholders in this articulation are the only the only consideration should be the only consideration of managers. Now, of course, the shareholders, the owners of the company, so maybe you could say that sort of makes sense in some ways. But unfortunately, this created a lot of sort of second order problems. So one example of that is the phenomenon of stock options, where executives' pay is tied to the very, very short-term performance of their firms. So this results in them sort of foregoing longer term projects that might benefit the environment, that sort of might take care of the environment or benefit the community. And another thing that these led to is massive amounts of wealth inequality. So you can see here this graph, when Milton Friedman was writing, the executive pay to average worker pay was about 20 to 1. And over the past number of years, as this idea of stock options and shareholder, sort of shareholder focus has really taken over, this has actually increased to 300, 400 to 1 almost. So this is seen as really a root cause of the economic inequality that we have in the world today, particularly in the US and elsewhere. And then also many of the sort of short-termism problems such as massive pollution issues that have increased. You can see here sort of a little funny cartoon that sort of illustrates this. Yes, the planet got destroyed, but for a beautiful moment in time, we created a lot of value for shareholders. This is something that it's gotten so serious, this problem, that it's not just sort of crazy left-wing academics like myself that are promoting it, but leading corporate and other sort of world leaders are also advocating a similar argument. So the Business Roundtable, which is the sort of trade group of the 200 largest companies in America, their CEOs recently put out a statement saying that business really needs to transform itself from being focused on truly for shareholders to all stakeholders. In 2020, early 2020, before the pandemic spread, the World Economic Forum, the theme of the World Economic Forum was a stakeholder capitalism, a manifesto for a cohesive and a sustainable world. So this idea that we had gone too far in focusing on shareholders and needed to reorient ourselves has really taken hold before the pandemic and even through the pandemic. And as we exit it with ideas of Build Back Better, it's even further increased. The argument of the book is, though, this is in some ways easier said than done. It's easy for the World Economic Forum, leading CEOs to say, we want to build more stakeholder-focused companies, but how to actually go about doing that. You can see, many laws that we have in the United States and elsewhere, securities law, corporate law, different types of incentives in markets are all actually oriented currently around shareholder primacy. So to actually make these changes, it actually requires much more systematic changes than just sort of saying that the business is going to do this. I think it's great that these businesses and leaders are starting to say that they're going to do this, but we need more if we're actually going to accomplish this. This is where I think that actually this B Corp idea and B Corp movement can play a really important role. The two elements of the model are, what's on the y-axis here, impact assessment. So there's part of the model becoming a B Corp is something called the B impact assessment that companies have to go through that measures, tracks, and reports in a transparent way on the company's ESG metrics. You might have heard of this term ESG a lot. It's been in the news quite a bit recently. It's environment, social governance. Investors like Larry Fink, actually the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission commissioner has issued some statements on it recently, saying that this is something that companies should be required to report on their ESG metrics. So one sort of element of this model is just a tool to help companies understand and assess their ESG performance. The other element is a corporate governance element. There's actually a new type of company, which I'll say a little bit more about, that these sort of entrepreneurs in this movement have founded throughout the world, started in the US, and now many countries have this new type of company where within the legal framework of the company, sort of the corporate incorporation articles is recognition that the company is not just for shareholders, not just for the owners, but actually has responsibilities to all stakeholders. And when you combine these two, and companies, if you do well in this assessment, companies can become B Corps. But I want to emphasize that the idea of the book is that not all companies can or should become B Corps, but these tools that I'm going to describe a little bit more are things all companies can use. And actually tens of thousands of companies use these different tools beyond just the number of B Corps. Here are actually a number of large B Corps. Some of these you might have heard of, Patagonia, Natura, Ben & Jerry's, King Arthur Flour, et cetera. Danone is a well-known supporter of the movement. Okay, so this B impact assessment, this is what I described as this ESG tool and framework, has 5 key sections: governance, workers, customers, community, environment. If you're able to actually get an 80 out of 200 on this assessment, you can become a B Corp. That's sort of the threshold to be able to achieve the certification. It is actually, sort of checked in some cases, audited. So it's not just what companies are saying, but it's actually, the certifying body, B Lab, actually plays a role as well. Okay, here's an example of just a high-level report. Patagonia, one of the better-known B Corps. You can see, here's the sub-scores across the different elements. Patagonia, well-known, focus on the environment, well-known, focus on communities, does very, very high in those regards. You can see here on the other side, on the right-hand side, is sort of how their scores changed over time. I put this here because, one of the things that many of the companies that I've talked to have said, this is a tool to improve over time. So you can see their first B impact score in 2011 was 107, and they've increased it to 151 in the most recent one. So, this, and actually, the assessment gets harder. It's actually is revised every 2 to 3 years. It's currently on the 6th or 7th iteration. And so they're actually getting higher score on a harder test. So they're improving, et cetera. This is actually why I titled the book Better Business, because so many of the companies that I interviewed, they said, we got into this movement. We wanted to become a B Corp because we wanted to sort of understand and verify our social and environmental footprints. But you know what? We came out of this actually a much better business, not just on social and environmental ideas, but on all aspects. In some ways, it's sort of like, this B impact assessment ESG management tool is like a cookbook to become a better business. And you can see here some of those quotes. This tool just makes a lot of intangible things more tangible. It provides sort of ways to benchmark, compare, and learn. And also, like the Patagonia example showed, it's a way for companies to actually continuously improve. And that's a consistent message that I got throughout my research for the book. I think very apropos to our time today, coming out of COVID, this dramatic economic disruption. There was a study of B Corps done through the 2008 economic downturn and recession, found that they were 63% more likely to survive than similar businesses and have a much higher survival rate. So, I think this all sort of fits together that, these companies are more sort of rigorously run in many ways through going through this process. This is something that investors have started to actually also take note of. You can see sort of on the right-hand side of the screen is major venture capital firms. These are the sort of most well-known, prestigious VC firms in the world. and all of them are investing in B corporations. This actually has changed in the last, certainly less than the last decade. When I first started studying this movement, maybe 10 years ago, a little over 10 years ago, people would say, well, that's great for a company like Patagonia that's privately owned, but there's no way that mainstream investors would be interested in these type of companies. And so by certifying, the company's really cutting itself off from key sources of capital. And this has really changed in the last number of years. And I must say, having talked to some mainstream venture capital companies that are investing in these firms, they're investing because they are good investments. It's not that they're trying to, these VC firms are trying to put a, sort of social presence or sort of greenwash in some way, or sort of, just doing it to look good. They're doing it because these companies they feel are actually very well run. Okay, so overall, in the past couple of years, 150 venture investors have invested over $2 billion in B Corps. Again, sort of, I think this is really, attesting to these are actually really well-run businesses with compelling economic models. When you start to get into the venture capital pipeline, what ends up at the other side of that is usually some sort of a liquidity event. Could be sale to a larger company. Frequently, it's IPO. These venture capital firms are buying these companies for, not to hold in their portfolio, but to actually have an exit. And so, just recently, there's been a number of B Corps that have exited in the public markets. Lemonade Online Insurer went public on the New York Stock Exchange. Vital Farms, pasture-raised egg dairy company, public on NASDAQ, and more recently, App Farm, which is a company that has an indoor farming company. They currently have a 60-acre indoor farm in Kentucky. Not only is it more environmentally friendly, they have located in a place that has had downturns as a result of sort of the coal industry shrinking. So they're hiring people in this place, in this location with high unemployment. Also, they produce fantastically tasting vegetables. And so Martha Stewart, you might recognize there, is an investor and board member because of the actual products they produce are better than conventional. One of the things that I find really compelling about sort of investor uptick is that companies are changing their articles of incorporation to become benefit corporations. I'll describe in a bit. So these are not like Viva, or excuse me, not like Lemonade, where they're sort of what you're getting into by buying into this IPO. They have their disclosures about B Corp. These are companies that have existing managers and existing shareholders. And all of these examples have been over 99% passage to become this new type of company called a benefit corporation. So I'll say a little bit about these benefit corporations right now. So when I started studying this movement, this actual type of company did not exist. There's a variety of different types of companies, like known as C Corps, limited liability company, and a variety of others. And this is a new type of company where within the corporate foundation documents, they articulate a corporate purpose and they are accountable and transparent on that purpose. And this type of company has passed throughout the world. And you can see started in the US. I think 2010 was the first state in the US to pass B Corp, or excuse me, benefit corporation laws. Now is all over the US and as well in a number of countries from sort of Africa to Europe to other North American entities, South America, et cetera. So it's really literally spreading around the world. So just quickly, the difference between these two different types of what I've been talking about. So I'm talking about B Corps, which is a certification that you can achieve by getting over a score on this assessment, this ESG assessment. And there's also benefit corporations, which is the legal type of company. so they're similar, but they're a little bit, they're also different. So I just want to highlight that it's sort of, one's a certification, B corporation, one's a legal form, benefit corporation. In case that was okay. So why are companies involved in this? Becoming B Corps, benefit corps. So in addition to this idea of just becoming a better business, it also builds a lasting employee culture. So many of the companies that I've talked to have said, this has really totally transformed our business. We used to have much higher attrition rates. Now our retention has gone through the roof. You can see a quote here on the bottom right-hand side from Tim Masson, who is at Ian Martin Group, which is a sort of technology consulting and outsourcing company with a lot of employees in India. Describes how average turnover for competitors is 40 to 50%. Theirs is under 10%. In addition to retention, attraction of employees also is something that really comes through when talking to these firms. Many of the companies I talked to and interviewed said, 5-7 years ago, employees weren't saying anything about being a B Corp, but now upwards of 25% of the people that are applying to these companies, like Athleta, other companies I've heard this from are New Belgium Brewery, Cabot Cheese, people are high quality talent, young talent, millennials, Gen Zs are applying to these firms because they are B Corps. Something else that is really important part of this movement, and I think when you think about the ESG, an important part of the S is around diversity and inclusion. And this is something around the world that is so important as companies form their workforce to sort of eliminate or sort of understand whether they actually are engaging in potentially discriminatory or other practices, and then sort of understand how to actually overcome that. Many of the companies I talk to, these are companies that are, socially, environmentally, on the cutting edge. They said, until we actually got into the data, we didn't realize that there were actually some inequities in our organization. And I really appreciate them sort of being honest and open about that. They said that, these things happen over time, and this is the idea of sort of systemic discrimination, systemic racism, where, pay disparities between men and women, for instance, may exist just because of the way the systems are constructed, not because of bias by any one individual. And so this is something where, actually going through and measuring and tracking and understanding is so important for all businesses, because, there might be some issues inside your companies which you don't know about it. In addition, not just for the economic, or sort of the social justice reason, there's also economic reasons to be more diverse as well. I mean, this is something, if you look across, the social sciences in general, from, economics to psychology, sociology, diverse teams, diverse companies, they're more innovative, they perform better. This is a wide-standing, sort of long-standing and powerful set of findings. So this can help your company get there. It's a global movement. This map might be a bit old. I don't see any in Egypt, but there might be some now. Like I mentioned, Rwanda actually recently passed benefit corporation law. I know B-Lab recently established a sort of an African subsidiary. The hotspots of the movement, outside the United States, are Europe, South America, and also Australia. There's actually more B Corps outside of the US than inside the US. Another important factor, I mentioned earlier when I first started studying this, so many people say, well, this works well for small companies, but it won't work necessarily for large companies, or companies that have, private investments, but not necessarily companies that try to go public. And so, there's been a lot of movement on investors side, and now there's a lot of movement on large companies side. So, there's just in the last year, a number of very large companies have signed on to a new program called B Movement Builders. And this is, a way for companies, large companies can work together to understand how to best use these tools to make their companies more socially and environmentally responsible. One way it's sort of spreading to large companies is through subsidiaries. So, Unilever has a number of B Corp subsidiaries. You can see there, Ben & Jerry's, 7th Generation, Danone does as well. Just think about the global nature of this. Fetzer here is a California wine. It's owned by Conchi Toro, which is a Chilean wine producer. Four Pines Brewery is a brewery in Australia. It's owned by Anheuser-Busch, a US-based brewery company. Overdrive, I believe it's US-based. It's an app whereby you can listen to audiobooks and read books online from the library. It's owned by Rakuten, Japanese e-commerce company, et cetera. So these are, lots of multinationals are involved in this, cross-cutting many different geographies. One of the things I think is really important about what B Lab has done is that they've synced up this ESG tool with the UN SDGs. And I think this is really important because, the UN has identified these 17 essential goals for humanity to make the world a better place and hopefully achieve or make significant progress against for 2030. These are not originally operationalized, so to speak, for business. So this provides a way for businesses to understand, how they are actually, sort of what SDGs they can most effectively work on, and then how to actually do it. So I think this is a really important integration. SDG 12 is responsible production and consumption. I think this is something all of us, myself, all of you on this call, as we think about ourselves as consumers, let's think about buying from companies that are socially and environmentally responsible. Why give our hard-earned money to companies that aren't treating the planet or their employees well? But while many people might believe in this, it's actually harder to actually know how to actually identify those. And that's where I think, even if company, the overall argument about the book is the companies should use these tools to becoming more stakeholder driven. I also think that there's value to the companies actually being a B Corp because they can actually put this label on their products, which they're doing increasingly, which then helps consumers know this is a company that is, exhibits sustainable practices, treats its employees well, and you can be sure that it's, not using sort of unnatural chemicals and et cetera. So here are just some examples of companies around the world using this. In conclusion, just like to summarize, I think that being a B Corp or being like a B Corp in some ways, many companies told me that it like future proofs their business. Going through this ESG process, the B impact assessment leads the company to actually be better. This new corporate governance form, the Benefit Corporation, helps companies be governed for the long term, focus on stakeholders, also increasingly aligned with investors, affects the employee culture of the firm, and also helps educate consumers, which I think are going to be increasingly important in the coming decade in understanding ways of helping achieve sustainable capitalism. So with that, I will stop. Thank you all again for attending. Thank you for your attention, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Chris. Please write your questions, comments in the chat box. I'm going to get things running a little bit.
Sure.
I was very interesting when you talked about World Economic Forum and the use of the expression of stakeholder capitalism.
Yes.
Frankly, when I heard the expression, I remember there was a book years ago. It was called The Elite Charade of Changing the World by Anand Lulis, and he was like saying that it really does not work. So you said you asked the question, what needs to be done?
Yes.
What needs to be done?
So I very much agree with sort of the book "Winners Take All" is the name of the book, and it's I think that, and he's right. I mean that a lot of these elite actors are saying, as you described, they're saying they're going to do well, but it's all just a charade to sort of distract from all of the all of the bad things that they're actually doing. And I think that in some ways I believe in his argument. I think strikes me as on target, where I think this movement helps counteract some of that, or sort of, I guess, two ways. So one is that companies have to be accountable. So you can't just say things. You actually have to be, to use these tools, you have to sort of measure, track, and be transparent. So it's not just about talk. You have to walk the walk too. The second thing, which I think really aligns well with his argument, his argument is the government should be doing more of this. We shouldn't leave it to companies to voluntarily do this. And I think these corporate governance, the new types of laws that enable companies to be more stakeholder driven, are one, sort of, I think, consistent with what he's talking about, that we need actually government to play a big role in this. So I think that the accountability and the policy standpoint of this model sync well with what he says.
Yes, I'm gonna follow on this. You've mentioned Danone. Danone really, as you've mentioned, they've espoused a more human, multi-stakeholder model of business, going back to the 1960s, started by the previous chairman, Antoine Ribaud.
Right.
Faber continues with it, and it is purpose-driven company in their legal status. Now, we actually, what's his name? Faber went and he's declared the defeat of Milton Friedman's shareholders concept.
Yeah.
Now, the interesting part is that 10 days back, he was actually outed. And he was convinced to sort of stay as the chairman, but they kicked him out completely.
Right.
And when you look at, and when he got out, actually interesting, the share rose 4% the same day.
Right.
And the new board is saying the priority of the board is now to transition toward an improved quote unquote governance by accelerating the process to recruit a new CEO. So, and their complaint, actually, they were comparing profits that they are making with Nestle.
Right.
So is that, this is really a social responsibility? What do you think of this?
That is a really interesting case, so to speak. And I think it, sort of 2 steps forwards, 1 step back. I hope some of these, this movement, but he was ousted by some activist investors. So these are people that come in, buy into firms, try to make short-term changes so the price goes up, which they publicize. And then they're not long-term holders in the stock, they actually sell. So, Danone actually just 6 months earlier, with 99% shareholder vote, passed, a change in its corporate, sort of articles of incorporation to become more stakeholder driven. Since Faber has stepped down, Danone is again, sort of said, this is part of our DNA. We're still going to be sustainability focused. But I think, I think that these sort of activist investors that are just focused on sort of creating corporate disruption for short-term change is exactly the opposite that our economic model should be focused on, because it's not about actually building a sustainable business. It's about it's about sort of jacking up the share price through dramatic events. And I think that I'm for companies being managed for the long term and not necessarily for shareholders in and out just alone.
Yeah, but you could argue also that he was the chairman and the CEO at the same time, which is probably not a good corporate governance practice.
I know that's not. Yeah, although interestingly, if you read some of the commentary, that was one of the things that the activist investors complained about. However, one of the activist investors, there were two of them, actually has the exact same model. So they were a little hypocritical, I think, as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now we have a question from Mr. Sharma. I'll let him unmute yourself, Vinay, and please ask your question.
Yeah, it was a great presentation, Chris. So my basic question is that, so my basic question is that is regarding I mean, the situation that is building up as far as the global economic architecture is concerned, of digitization and automation, which is leading to, a lot of, I mean, lot of automation into the industry, and which is leading to the factors of production like labor, capital, and land being eroded. It is not considered today to be that significant to have, these factor of production, and instead of that, the focus is much more on due to these big tech, on the digitization, blockchain, fintech, which is taking away the entrepreneurial, enterprise that was known, and that is one of the reasons, the real wages are falling, and that is why, in the last, the economy is much more different, and as far as scale is concerned, as in comparison to 80s and 90s. So, what will be the future as far as future is concerned? Because even in the recent days, we have heard, recently about the Archelos, scandal that has taken, even after 2007, crisis, we are still investing in very risky derivatives, risky instruments, financial instruments, and these instruments are basically, completely destroying the real economy. And that is why we in fact even had this scandal of green seal, etc. And so, in fact, the financial economy, too much of financialization, and it is leading to too much of, executive pays at astronomical level, and the common man, average person is feeling completely his purchasing power, and his lifestyle is getting completely. He is not able to get that sort of political power. He is not able to get because of these big techs, and have an absolute monopoly on the completely monopoly on the both on the corporate system as well as on the political system. So how do you deal with such type of complex systems?
Yeah, it's very complex, and your question is very complex as well. And you you packed a lot of I think there are things that are connected in there. But for sort of the interest of time, I'll just comment on a little bit of it. I think so I agree with you. I mean, the world is changing in a number of ways that are that it's not clear what the socially responsible ethics implications are. You mentioned things like automation, issues with digitalization. Just in the last number of years, if you look at the big tech in the US, these have gone from being seen as, sort of paragons of, sort of US industry to really sort of pariahs of, sort of misinformation, exploitation of labor. So I think that, and I don't think that we've really figured out yet, like what the right sort of norms and responsibilities of these companies are. And I think that, this model provides a useful way for them to think about their different responsibilities. I know, I think it was this summer, sometime maybe this past summer, July, the 4 CEOs of, Google, Apple, Facebook, and Google, Apple, Facebook, and I don't think it was Twitter, but there was a 4th one. And they were asked, actually, they were called in front of the US Congress, and they were asked, like, if you thought about becoming a B Corp or a benefit corp by the US Congress, because, this would be a way to help, them put some balance into their economic model. There's been articles that have suggested that Facebook actually really needs to consider this model because it's become so one-sided. So I think that you're right. There are sort of systemic issues that technology in a number of different ways has brought to our economy, and how to actually, how to actually move forward is still uncertain. But I think that this model definitely helps with it.
Thanks.
Thank you, Vinay. Raymond Tanner, please.
Okay, thanks, Ali. Great presentation. Thanks a lot, Chris. I was
Thank
just
you, Raymond.
wondering, it was mentioned already before. I think it was brought up, the case with Dan and Faber.
Yep.
This activist fund, their ability to act almost like the famous Vulture Funds, who can torpedo a deal where an indebted country gets together relief, but they hold out and then cash in on the value or simply destroy an agreement. Is there a way to prevent such small companies from acting similarly and have a destructive impact as such vulture funds? Do we need laws to prevent that? Because after all, if they can just get into even a nice purpose-driven B company and everything looks good, but they find a loophole to convince other shareholders to sink it, is there a way to put up a defensive mechanism against that?
I'm very much in support of having a defensive mechanism. I think, you know, I like your comment. I do think, you know, thinking about these funds as vultures is a good sort of descriptor. I don't know. I think that, you know, there has been in the U.S. some discussion of reforming corporate governance so that, you know, the large companies in particular would legally be required to consider a variety of different stakeholders. You know, one reason why these vultures are able to act like they are is because around the world, a lot of the sort of legal precepts are that shareholders come first. So that might be some way to help. But, you know, I agree that they're destructive to the long-term, you know, economic and social development of the world, and really support laws. Although, aside from that one example, I'm not sure what kind of laws could exist. So thank you.
Thank you, Raymond. Now, Katrina.
Hello, thank you very much, Chris. I really enjoyed your presentation.
Thank you.
Big fan of B Corps, and you know, I'm studying them in the Russian context, and so far I know two. So the map, you can add two more. Well, at least now one exists. One extend.
That's great.
And I was wondering, have you studied the duration of time that companies, once they got certified, they're staying B Corps? Because my feeling, at least from the very small experience of the Russian companies, that's not always the case. So I was just wondering.
So I think it's a relatively high percentage of companies that once they continue to be certified. There was a change in the model in maybe 5 or 6 years ago that resulted in some companies actually not being able to continue being certified. So there was a number of them, like some of the well-known ones actually in the United States, like Etsy, Warby Parker, ended up decertifying. But it's a relatively high percentage that maintain their certification. Yeah, and it's great to hear that there's some in Russia. I mean, it's you know, it's I need to find a new map. You're right.
Thank you, Katrina. Always great to have you. Juliet, you have a comment? You want to say it? Juliet? You have to unmute yourself. Try now.
It's working. Hello. Hi. Sorry.
No problem.
Yeah, no, it was just to share. I just put a link in the chat there just to share with people that there's a big program that we're engaged with at the British Council through the British Academy, of which there are a number of US stakeholders involved around the purpose of business. It's being led by Professor Colin Mayer at Oxford University. There's been some really good suggestions and proposals made in that research to start. So where my starting point would always be that I would be supportive of social enterprises and B Corp movements who have mission at their purpose. That there is a shift in the research amongst academia, I think, to begin to think about how do you change the hearts and minds and the behaviors of the majority of businesses. So I just wanted to share that. And while I'm not muted, I had a secondary question that I was just typing when Ali invited me to speak, which was really to ask you what your thoughts were on education systems. You know, what is the role of business schools? You know, if you're talking about this being a big slow machine that's going to take a long time to move and change, surely there has to be something that globally we should be doing in terms of our education systems, whether that talks to SDG 8 or whatever it talks to.
Right.
That young people are introduced to these concepts of doing business differently and better. And at the moment, it's very scant. There's very few places that do that.
Yeah, good. First of all, thank you for sort of sending the link. I encourage people to take a look at it. I know, you know, the work of Professor Meyer. He's a real pioneer in this area. Yeah, former dean as well of Oxford's Business School, and you know, I've been lucky to be on some panels with him and really appreciate his you know, this long-standing work. And I do think, you know, I mean, I think it's what I'm trying to talk about. I mean, B Corps, I think, are in some ways in social enterprises are one flavor, but I hope that, you know, we can convince all companies to be more socially responsible, more purpose-driven, more stakeholder-driven. Part of that is, yeah, changing, you know, minds, like you mentioned. And in business schools, you know, I'm a professor at a business school, and so I think about this, you know, sometimes, you know, as it is now, you know, there are electives where students can, you know, learn about social enterprise, learn about environmental sustainability, but I think that, you know, it should be really integrated in a much more fundamental way in the curriculum. I mean, I think so, not to generalize too much, but I found that many of my colleagues in the finance and accounting areas are really deeply steeped in the shareholder primacy idea. Whereas, like, you know, I'm in the management area or marketing, you know, people seem to, you know, have a more socially focused ideology. I've found. I mean, I think it's, you know, the wedge in some ways maybe can, you know, it could be through some of this discussion of ESG, because many leading investors are advocating this. And I think if, you know, we're able to, you know, get much more ESG content in the curriculum through the finance and accounting, that is one step that I think would be very very useful. And I think it's very tractable too. I mean, I think it's something, you know, given you have Larry Fink, who's the largest private investor, given you have the chairman of the SEC, both calling for this, I think there's some possibility there. So great. And it's great to thank you very much. I'm going to be in the UK in the next few weeks, and I'm going to look into your look more at your program. Maybe send Professor Meyer an email. Thank you,
Juliet. Colin Meyer actually is a finance professor. He was one of the speakers in our webinar series, and we brought after him Bruno Roche. They collaborate on something called the economics of mutuality. I have questions until people get a little bit warmed up. My first question, when you look at the B Lab, which is the certifying agency, it's an NGO, but it tends to be a local NGO, which is very different than the ISO, for example. The ISO is an international NGO.
Yes.
And you can see right away, I mean, yes, it might be more quick to act when you have local, but when you have global reach, you could have global standards, you could have really better communication of knowledge. Why is that? Why is it just NGOs everywhere and they're just coming up?
So I think that I think there is a challenge sometimes of balancing global standards with local realities, and so I know that you know, B Lab. I mean, there is B Lab Global, which is, you know, headquartered in the U.S. And you know, they have affiliate B Labs in, you know, everywhere from from Europe, the UK, East Africa, various places in Asia. The standards then, they have, there's a recognition that companies' geography and laws vary, companies' size, industry varies, and so I think that it's they're trying to actually make sure that the standards that they set in certification actually have local relevance as well.
Okay, I have another question, but I hope it's taken in the right way. I looked at your book in Amazon a few months back when I was buying it, and I was looking at the reviews. Everything is flying color except one reviewer, and I think he might have a point. He says usually when we write about those type of concepts, we write to sort of rally the supporters,
right,
and not enlist the others. You see what he's trying to say?
Yeah, no, I know that review.
Yes.
I've read that review myself.
Because I think we all do this. It's interesting. We always, when
definitely.
we have not a mainstream idea, we always try to sort of get a group around you, and then you forget about that. There are very few of you, and you forget that there are many out who are not.
Exactly. Sort of preaching to the choir type of phenomenon. Yeah. So I mean, it's interesting. I mean, certainly I try very hard through the book to describe the model in a way that shows how it can actually make a difference for companies. I respect the readers' comments. That's certainly very, very fair. My sense, though, the overarching argument I have for the book is that this is something that actually is useful for all companies. Not that all companies should be B Corps, but that ESG management, corporate governance tools that recognize stakeholders are things that could actually be, all companies can use. And so that's actually in many ways the message of the book. And yeah, I mean, that reviewer, he really wrote a very long review, so he must have thought a lot about it. But I feel maybe I was not clear enough in communicating the message such that he had that interpretation.
Yeah,
or she.
we all do that. We all tend to sort of, especially when you have one comment which is interesting. I just had a talk a few weeks ago with Samprita Ganguly, which she's managing an impact investment company called Arabella.
Okay.
Which basically is a platform to sort of get philanthropic funds and then do impact investment with it. And she's a B Corp. She's very proud that she's a B corporation. So sort of following what you're saying, I mean, it's really everywhere. It's becoming everywhere now. Okay. So I don't see any questions, and if that's the case, I think we can end in good times. You could catch up with your next appointment. I really want to thank you for an extremely insightful webinar, great discussion, and I thank all the participating in this webinar, and I look forward to seeing you all on Wednesday, April 7th. This is going to be our last webinar, because after that we're going to get into Ramadan. And the title is Can Humanity Live Within the Donut? And the speaker is Kate Raworth. She's the author of an internationally best-selling book called Donut Economics, and she's the founder of DEAL, Donut Economics Action Lab. Now, thank you again, Chris. It's been a pleasure, and I really thank you for participating with us.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Ali. Really an honor, and I really appreciate all the questions and everyone attending. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Great. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.